I'm starting a series of reviews on the Niner RLT9 RDO. This is a bike that I purchased for my next project, which I'm calling Cross versus Gravel, where I'll do an in-depth comparison of a cross bike and a gravel bike and talk about the differences and talk about which bike is right for which application. But my review series for the bike will only focus on this bike, so it'll be kind of an aside from my project. So as I do with a lot of my review series, the first video that I make is simply a first look. I'm not really going to talk about the ride characteristics. I got it built up and I've done one ride, but not enough time to really talk about the ride characteristics in depth. So we'll just look at the bike. I'll talk about the features on it. And this bike is kind of new because Niner has just recently changed the specs on their gravel bikes, the RLT9 RDO. And I'll talk about those changes. It's mainly in the drivetrain and the wheels, but we'll get into those changes as I go over the components. So let's take a good close-up look at this bike. So this, of course, is a carbon frame. That's what the RDO indicates, as opposed to the aluminum RLT and the steel RLT. As with their other RLT gravel bikes, this one has a sloping top tube, and that helps in lowering the center of gravity a little bit to help with the stability. But what it really does is it allows more seat posts to extend from the frame. So this is a carbon seat post that flexes a little bit, and the more that comes out of the frame, the more it's allowed to flex, and that helps in bump absorption. The cable routing on this bike is very clean. You've got the front derailleur coming in the right side of the bike, and then on the left side of the bike you've got your rear brake and your rear shifter. Of course, the rear derailleur cable comes out right there. It's all the way inside the frame until it comes out there. Same with the rear brake. It pops out right there on the left chainstay. Like many bike mechanics, I have somewhat of a love-hate relationship with internal cable routing. I love it when it's installed because it looks great, it's very clean. However, there are times where it can be very frustrating. So it's kind of a mixed bag with this bike. Going from the head tube down to the bottom bracket is awesome. There are channels so you can run the cables inside, and they come out 3 holes in the bottom. So Niner has a little door you can open up underneath the frame to allow management of those cables as you're getting them through the frame. The rear derailleur is fine. So what I had to do is I routed it from back here and getting it through the chainstay and then going into one of those holes and allowing it to come up. That was really not a problem. The front derailleur was a little bit more of a problem, and because it's a really tight bend to get it to come out of the frame, so you kind of have to work it, guide it through with an inner wire. There may be a better method. The method that I used worked. It was a little time consuming, took a little bit of effort. The rear brake was more of an issue because with the SRAM brakes, you cut the cable at the caliper as opposed to the head tube. So again, like I said, running the cables from up here at the head tube down to the bottom bracket was fine. But when I tried to go from the bottom bracket to this hole here, that's where it was a challenge because it was very hard to get it out of this hole. What I finally had to do was stick an inner wire into the brake hose and then guide it out of that little hole. Once I learned that trick, it was fine. I wish I would have known that trick because I tried for like 20 minutes before I knew it. Now, if I had to do it again, it'd probably be really quick. So if you ever build one of these up, do that trick. Put an inner wire into the hose to guide it out of that hole that comes out on the chainstay. The fork on this bike, of course, is carbon as well, with a carbon steerer tube. And you've got braze-ons for racks and fenders. And I think you can even put water bottle cages there if you really needed to, if you're going on a really long ride. And of course, the frame does fit 2 water bottle cages. Let's check out the tire clearance on this bike. So up front, it's pretty decent. So these tires measure out to about 40C when they're installed, so that's pretty good clearance. The back is, it's okay. You know, like I said, 40Cs, you can't go bigger than 40C and have good mud clearance. One thing that's interesting on this bike is there are no quick releases. So obviously it's through axle, which really helps in the stiffness and helps with the braking. But both in the front and in the back, you don't have quick releases. So just like mountain bikes, looks like quick releases are becoming a thing of the past. So this bike is the 3-star build, which comes with SRAM Rival. And I actually had the 4-star build on order, which comes with the new Shimano Ultegra. However, Shimano was delayed in getting those components to Niner. So rather than waiting, which I kept waiting for a couple weeks, I just decided to go ahead and get the 3-star build on order, which I'm glad I did now, because I have SRAM Force 1 on my cross bike. So I'm very used to the shifting of the SRAM system, and so I don't have to, think about going back and forth between shifting Shimano and SRAM. So just recently, like I mentioned previously, Niner has changed the specs a little bit. Specifically, they've increased the size of the front chainring, so now it has a 50, which is the largest chainring, and the smallest is a 34. So I think previously it was a 46, so that's going to increase the top end gear range. And while I'm speaking of gears, I prefer having a 2x system on a gravel bike. I do like the simplicity of the 1x systems, but on a gravel bike, your speeds vary so much. You might be doing a 3-mile-an-hour steep climb, or you might be flying down a hill at 45 miles an hour. So having 2 front chain rings is going to give me more of a gear range. It also allows for a narrowly spaced cassette. So this has an 1132. My cross bike has a 1x system with a 40 tooth in the front and 1136 in the back. The reason I like a more narrowly spaced cassette is I don't have as much of a jump between gears, so it's easier to find that right gear. The wheels on this bike are the Stans Grail, which I'm really glad Niner included those. Those are the exact wheels that I would personally buy if I were going to build a gravel bike. So really good spec on this bike. Also, it comes with the Schwalbe G1 tires. Niner has actually increased the size. They had 35C tires, now they're putting 38C tires, which is a great move. Niner says that these actually, once you install them on the rim, measure out to 40C. So I don't have a gauge to measure tire width, but I can tell you by looking at these and looking at other 40C tires, that's probably true. So pretty good volume. Again, this is a tire that I personally would spec. I like the G1s and I like the Maxxis Ramblers. Both of those tires I really like, but this is a great spec on this bike. I've used Niner saddles in the past. Out of all the saddles that I've used, actually the Niner house brand saddles are my favorite saddles, especially for longer rides. Had no real issues with comfort for this saddle. I've done 100-mile gravel rides on this saddle with no issue. Like I said, the seat post is carbon. It's designed with flex in it to absorb bumps. The stem on the bike is a Niner house brand stem, just really good basic stem, no issues. And then it comes with these Easton bars. This is the first handlebar, road handlebar, that I've used that has a flare to it. So what that means is the bottom of the handlebar flares out, and so it allows for your hands to kind of rest in a little bit more of a natural position. I was a little apprehensive when I first saw these bars on this bike. I'm so used to just regular straight road handlebars. I've never used these, but I've done one ride. I'm not going to talk too much about ride characteristics yet, but I can say that I really quickly got used to these handlebars. They're actually very comfortable. They're comfortable here with your hands resting, but even more comfortable when you're in the drops. I don't use the drops very much on a road bike. I mainly ride in the hoods or if I'm climbing on the flats. But I can tell you, I actually use the drops more on this bike than I ever have on that one ride because of how comfortable it is. So again, I was apprehensive, but now I'm really liking this handlebar. And of course, when I do my review of the bike, I'll talk about how I feel about it. So again, that's just kind of an overview that I like to do on a bike before I get into the review. And by the way, my buddy over at Gravel Cyclist has just finished his long-term review of the Niner RLT. He got his hands on it at Rebecca's Private Idaho and then raced and rode that bike for several months. And he actually had the top of the line, the 5-star build that was Ultegra Di2, which actually Niner has changed. They no longer have the Di2 version, but the frame's the same. So he just did a really good YouTube review. Go check that out. My channel is more focused on mountain, cyclocross, and gravel. He's focused specifically on gravel. Has a really good website too if you're into looking at gravel events and things like that. So go check his review out. What I'm really interested in experiencing with this bike is how comfortable it is. So I've been riding my carbon cyclocross race bike on gravel roads for about a year now. I used to own the RLT9 aluminum, and then I got the steel. The aluminum was a little bit too harsh. The steel was great, super comfortable, a little bit flexy and heavy for when the pace got high in fast group rides. So that's why I went to my cyclocross race bike. When I test rode this bike in Colorado a few months ago, I was pretty amazed at how well the bike rode. I think it's really going to blend the ride characteristics that I liked from the steel and the aluminum into one package. So I'm really curious to get some miles on this bike. So today I'm heading out on my first real ride. It's going to be about a, I don't know, 60, 70 mile gravel ride, just to kind of get used to the bike. Like I said, I'm not really going to talk about ride characteristics, but I can tell you from the one ride that I've done so far after I got the bike built up, I was pretty blown away at the comfort of this bike compared to my cyclocross bike. My cyclocross bike is a pretty comfortable carbon. It's a Giant, which is pretty compliant for a carbon cyclocross race bike. I was totally content on the gravel roads with that thing. But this bike actually, again, it's just one ride, but it really surpassed my expectations of comfort. But that's it for ride characteristics. I want to get some good miles on this before I really get into the review part of this series. So check back on my channel for the reviews of this bike. I'll probably do just a 1 week review, just kind of summarize how the first week went on this bike, and then I'll get into more of the long-term reviews as I get more miles on the bike. Any questions or comments, go ahead and drop those below. Thanks for watching.